The episode you are about to hear was originally recorded at an MSTU, epic marathon stream at Theory Underground. Theory Underground is a lecture course, ongoing research, seminar, and book publishing school buy-in for workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing organizations, institutions, and movements. We are all about trying to understand the situation anew. This requires what Marx called the ruthless critique of everything in existence, including the left, Marxism, politics more generally, church, capital, modern schooling. It's all up for question. Whether you are an atheist or devoutly religious, whether you are in a political movement or party, or are independent, whether right or left or neither left nor right, you're welcome here. If you want to get more involved, there's two main ways to do that. To support the public and free content, you can become a patron over at our Patreon. But if you want to get involved, if you want to have special access to some of the course content that is only for members, or if you are interested in being a part of the discussions or being up for the turn, having us actually read your work, then you'll want to become a subscriber. Go to theoryunderground.com and get involved. Thank you. Today we're joined by Daniel Garner, one half of OG Rose. Welcome back. How you doing, Daniel?
I am doing well. We have managed to plant the grass seed. It has not all been washed away by the rain, and this is the time of year you want to do it, so the roots are strongest during the spring, and managed to do it, and the birds have not eaten them all up. So I consider this a great success. So it is part of the good of life at this point in time.
So I guess kind of where I want to start out with, between capital, church, and state, there are institutions. And there are outmoded institutions. There are institutions that can be reformed. There are institutions that can be re-instrumentalized. There are institutions that need to be perhaps like completely rendered redundant by other means. And part of that is a question of like bureaucratic glut and the way that can be cleared out versus like, no, we actually need, we need means by which to be able to set people up with institutional legitimation. And a part of that would just be like professions matter, professionalism matters. You don't want the person who just decided after their last shroom trip that they're a witch doctor to do the heart surgery for you. You probably actually need somebody who specializes in these things. So that's just sort of like general terrain of problems. And I think that as I was just alluding to, Matthew Stanley is going to kind of get into the idea of a critical bureaucratic studies. He kind of starts laying out the sort of constellation in his piece on Substack called Notes Towards a Sociology from Below. I think that's the title of it. Go ahead and share it in the chat if you get a chance, anybody. But I want to step back and just say, like, we need like these sort of orienting principles or questions about the good and the good life, and that part of what we get into when we start doing this, obviously, coming from a critical theory kind of standpoint, is going to be, well, most of what critical theory seems to do is problematize the ways that the good gets conflated with the normal, gets conflated with the natural, gets conflated with the just, gets conflated with the beautiful. And of course, every one of those terms opens up a different area of philosophy. The question of the good opens up ethics, but also political philosophy. The question of the beautiful, aesthetics, obviously. The question of the true, I think I left the true off of my little litany there, but obviously this would open up epistemology. What's real, though, and also what's real and how that relates to what's natural, or what we can say is like, how we might separate essences from what's natural. If there is a separation that needs to be established there, all of this is a bunch of knots. It's a tangled up mess. And I take one of the tasks of philosophy to be sort of untangling that and laying out, like, for oneself, if not others, I mean, preferably through others, through reason, right? You're trying to untangle that to the best of your ability and figure out, okay, what goes where, peanut butter, chocolate, oh, they can get mixed over here. That's okay. But also, these are distinct things. Okay. And so that's the rat's nest of problems. It's a real philosopher's dilemma. It's something that literary critics and debate bros don't have to worry about. It's something that people who want to understand and change the situation do have to concern themselves with. And so on that that's my sort of little stage for you. Now you can climb on that stage and do whatever you like, but your writing is always kind of coming from, I think, a standpoint that sees this problem and takes it very seriously. And so help me out. Like, how do you approach this situation?
Well, that's magnificent. And you mentioned stage. So if we want to do karaoke, I think we've got the voice like differentiation to do harmony. I think, and that would be an example of the true and the good and the beautiful all together, bringing people together. No, I think you framed things very well. As a few opening thoughts, I think what you were saying about the separation of terms is spot on. You know, Wittgenstein obviously has that famous line that the limits of my language are the limits of my world. I always took that, though, to also mean that the expressions of my language are the expressions of my world. And if I don't have clear, distinct expressions, then my world becomes muddled, it becomes confused, it becomes difficult to organize yourself in it. Rita Dove, the poet, I believe, also said that when you lose a word, you lose the ability to experience something of that nature. So if you only have the word blue, for example, you don't have azure, cerulean, navy, then actually you may think that would have no effect on your experience. But there's an argument to be made that by only having that single term, you actually do have a different qualitative experience, per se. The way you experience things is quite different. And this is where various philosophers, you could mention Heidegger, and there are others, have suggested that it's very difficult for the philosopher to do philosophy without poetry or music or art, precisely then because the quality of their qualia is less and less defined. Therefore, that will hinder the unfolding and the quality of their thought. Those things go together. And I do think the phenomenology of the artist, as I've called it, is extremely important to do philosophy, which is distinct from pragmatism or the neo-pragmatism of a Richard Rorty, and yet it has something of the C.S. Peirce pragmatism in it. The other thing I was going to say, too, you know, a painting consists of a lot of colors. Take a Mona Lisa, but they're not mixed. They're rightly proportioned. The blue stops here, the black is there. So you're bringing a lot of different things together, but knowing where the color begins or ends. If you took all the colors of the Mona Lisa and threw them on a canvas and mixed them, yeah, sure, there'd be all of the colors of the Mona Lisa, but there would be no painting, because it is precisely the proportioning, the judgment, the discernment, the ratios, and all of those things that make the painting possible. That, please note, at any moment, the entire painting could be ruined because, you know, he does the brush wrong or somebody scratches it or you mix the colors incorrectly, right? So a painting, to just stick with that example, is precisely a testament to a skillful proportioning of colors, a vision, of having a vision of what you're going to paint that's tied to reality, that's tied to experience, that's tied to skill, and that is also very, very risky. I mean, I can't imagine. I have a good friend, James Erickson, James Dean Erickson, and he's a great painter. And Christina Rakowski, Christina Ford now, and they do these live paintings. I'm like, oh my gosh, days and days of this brushstroke, and one mistake, and the whole thing is ruined. That's kind of terrifying. That's kind of freaking terrifying. And then what if it catches fire and it's destroyed, right? There's a certain courage that goes into all of that. All of that orientation, I think, is the precise way to approach the question of the good. And a problem has been we've approached the good more like a certain, dare I say, archaeologist that is trying to dig up the right place to find the fundamental principle. And now we have a basis for the good. Now we know what the objective good is, and we're good to go. I think that's the wrong metaphor by which to think of the good. I think the good is something like a painting that, when it's done correctly, it brings together, because you mentioned the true, the good, and the beautiful. There's always this odd thing in classical thought where those are distinct, but somehow also go together.
Right.
And then simultaneously, there's a hierarchy. And yet that hierarchy is not, please.
One, I would just interject that people want to act like it's just classical thought that does that, but normal American or anybody, any common sense, naturally, this is why I brought in the word natural, normal, and good. I like to focus in on the natural, the normal, and the good with my students, because my students know that just because something's normal, it's not necessarily natural. In fact, they know it's almost definitely not natural. It's socially constructed, and then they'll go, well, and if I like it or if I don't like it is almost like what determines whether it's good or bad, or like, oh, it's socially constructed and it's not natural and it brings about pain for some people, therefore it's bad. And of course, I know that with your approach to sociology as trade-offs instead of this paranoid approach, it's not going to be so easy to just go, well, yeah, so therefore just throw it out. We could construct whatever we like. But anyway, bringing it back though, this idea that the true, the beautiful, and the good, that those three things go together. Yeah. And that they feel natural and normal like that. Yeah. That's just called average everydayness for Heidegger. Right. And so but the point is that anybody in any common sense, in any doxa, even people who are pure relative postmodernists who just go, no, it's all just made up. And there's my normal and there's your normal and we each have our own normal and we're all weird and queer. Even then, you still believe other people believe in some idea of normal that's not yours, and that most other people believe in this other idea of normal. And then you'll often think of it as sort of natural, and that you either say that's good or that's bad. Your entire identity formation is in reference to whether it's good or it's bad. And so it really is like this thing that we can't get outside of or away from. We can only sit here and try to untangle it and actually kind of like, yeah, as you said, unmix it.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well put. I think it's exactly right. This is classical thought that is practically modern. We still live it today. I think one of the big mistakes, and I should note the following, if anyone's watching this hasn't seen it, Studebaker did an incredible lecture on the good in Plato. I also will have in mind Thomas Jockin's work on the beautiful. I also will be thinking Alex and Andrew's work on story, which has parts that are inspired by David Wolfstort on goodness. And Alex and Andrew, who I've had the pleasure of working with, are trying to sublate the logic of story from Aristotle into a Heideggerian structure. And they had a conversation on the meaning code about it, and I highly suggest it. So I will be thinking those thinkers. The other point I wanted to make is I think we often don't realize how much, say, let's take Aristotelian metaphysics, are actually just based on observation. And also there's a kind of chain in Aristotle where, for example, the metaphysics is what follows from the physics. And the physics is really focused on the question of change and the fact that everything is changing. Well, this weird question arises. If trees are always changing, then how is there some stable thing that I refer to as a tree and it's meaningful? That's weird. All I ever observe is change, and yet there seems to be something constant, whatever that might be. So the point is that the metaphysics follows from the physics, which are based on observations. Oh, and by the way, if we can't figure out this stable thing, how do we do categorization, which he's big on taxonomy, like categories are big in Aristotle, biology, science. Oh, and if you can't do categorization, how do you think? And if you can't think, how do you begin to do the political? And how do you begin to determine how to do art? So from an observation of how people organize themselves in the world, there's a kind of, I'll call it the Aristotelian chain. If we do ourselves a great disservice sometimes, I think, when we divide philosophers into books, as if the physics has nothing to do with the polis and the metaphysics have nothing to do with the drama, when actually it's a continual unfolding of thought that has different manifestations in different ways. And it's much more observation-based than we realize. I think, I don't know this for sure, but I believe Aristotle did a stupid amount of categorization of sea animals, like fish and going along the ocean. I mean, this is a very kind of scientific individual, obviously not according to our modern after Francis Bacon notion or Firebend or whatever, but he's very interested in observation. So he's observing that people are, in fact, motivated by the good, the true, and the beautiful. That it's very difficult for people to make decisions and it not be based on an idea of a good. Another example of this, and I think this will bring it together. Augustine basically makes the argument that there's no such thing as a bad intention. If you intend it, you must think it's good. Even if it's murder or suicide or something bad, well, if you do it, you think it's good to do. So there's no such thing as a bad intention. There's a good intention that could have a bad result. But if you intend something, you think it's good to do, even if you're wrong, right? Huh. And so, so that's also why it's very problematic today that we over-index intention as an indication of ethics, because there's no such thing as a bad intention, right? Because even if you're like mad at someone, you think it's good to be mad at them because they did something wrong, right? Like Augustine is suggesting that there's always a notion of the good wrapped up in an intention, right? And so you can't escape that. Likewise, the reason why this is very important is because when we're asking questions of the good, there are many senses we can mean it. We can mean it as my idea of the good. We can mean it versus what actually is the good versus the consequence of the good in all of these different things. And as a result, this conflation occurs that I think you were mentioning at the beginning that leads to a lot of conflated language in a world that cannot express itself but in a muddled way, and thus cannot be a painting like the Mona Lisa because the colors are all distinct and thus it cannot be beautiful. A way I think about it that I think has basically where the conversation on the good can often get stuck, and this is where I'll talk about Alex and Andrew's work a bit, is if I were to ask you what makes a good story, why is a story good? Well, let's say there's no grammar mistakes. Let's say the sentences are all well constructed. Let's say that the paragraph, like there are no technical errors. Would you say that the short story is good? No. It could have no grammar mistakes. It could be all technically perfect and characters and follow the poetics, but that alone doesn't make a good story, right? A good story has to do that and also create a certain emotional effect, right? But you see, here's the issue. That means there can be different senses of the good. And I think often when we talk about the good in society, we're simply talking about the grammar. We're not talking about the effect. And you see what ends up happening is that's why most ethical, like, so for example, when you talk about utilitarianism or long-termism or different things like that, these are the good, like if you don't have food, you don't have shelter, and I know Nance was talking about this kind of good comfort you need, but then there's this dangerous comfort too, right? There's this comfort of, I'm so stressed because I can't eat, that then seems to get in the way of a higher, like beauty or, good, but then there's the comfort that makes you, well, not drinking your carrot juice, right? Because you don't want to go through suffering and it makes you uncomfortable and you're not going through the hard things to get good, right? The way I would talk about it is that utilitarianism is a moral philosophy to determine the good that sets the infrastructure, but doesn't alone necessarily move to the good of the effect of the short story, which starts moving to the beautiful, right? And what's happened is because we've gotten stuck in utilitarianism, there's a virtue ethics, value ethics, and different things. Then in first world nations or nations that are more technologically advanced, we're still applying a moral theory that is basically the editing of the grammar of society. And we're not able to move into how to train modes of consciousness to be able to identify the good that is beyond simply material necessity. Now, again, without material necessity, the short story has bad grammar. The sentences don't make much sense. So you can't have the story. But just because you have all of that doesn't necessarily mean that people have a mode of consciousness that can be intrinsically motivated, move to drive. Terrence had that lovely chart. Like to make those movements, you could have all those material conditions, but not necessarily move up the chain. Now, what's interesting is I think the short story example can also, so to finish the point, actually, utilitarianism is the correct, fitting moral theory, and I'm using moral and ethics more conflated here, so forgive me for that. But ethics generally is social, moral can be more individual, is how philosophers might put it. But utilitarianism is very good for third world nations to make sure they get running water, healthcare, all of those different things. And certainly many first world nations don't always have those. So, I'm speaking generally, of course. That's very fitting. But as you move to a first world nation, and those things can more readily be assumed, even though not perfectly, of course, because I know McMathis, he was talking about the healthcare system, and yeah, that's grand. And I like what Studebaker was also saying about those kind of reforms, right? In those kind of areas. But as you move to first world, that's when you have to start thinking about how do we determine the good in a relationship. Utilitarianism will not tell you, for example, how you should talk with your partner, how to be a good friend, what it means to actually value goods that are better than other goods, right? How to engage in something like a theory underground, right? There's another level of discernment and judgment and decision making that has to be organized that is only possible because you've done the work of utilitarianism, but there's an additional level of the good that has to be considered. Now, this is also important, though, because like someone like an Aristotle, and if I use Mr. Jockin's work or also a Plato, is if you have the true of this sentence in the short story, you say, okay, this is the factual information. This is the true sentence. The tree was tall and it had green leaves. Then you go through the whole story and say, it's good because there's no grammar mistake, right? Well, then the good includes the true because the good can only be there because you've had a bunch of true statements and true words and informations to add up to the good. So then the good includes the true. But then if it is a great short story, like The Dead by James Joyce, in my opinion, some of the Don DeLeo or maybe Greenleaf, then it is also, you could say, beautiful, or maybe capital G good if you wanted, which then includes the good and the true, as if it is all those things at the same time. But then, funny enough, if you have a story that has no grammar mistakes and it has all the information perfect, but it's kind of boring, it's as if suddenly it's not even good and true. It's as if it doesn't accomplish anything. That's the weird thing, right? And I think that describes very well when we talk about, say, capitalism or the capital nation state that we have today or institutions. So like you were talking with Nick Land about, he was making the point of capitalism organizing resources, responding to desires and things like that. So as a functioning mechanism, you can say it's good. The social grammar is there. Here's the problem. If the effect is not ultimately beautiful or capital G, it's as if it's not good. It's as if it doesn't entail truth because it ultimately frames on the highest metric. So then the question becomes, what is the ultimate aim or goal of the capital nation state or the society and the institutions and all of these things? What are they ultimately in the business of, right, at the end point, right? Well, following Plato and Aristotle, it's ultimately going to be an effect of the good, an effect of the beautiful that requires the infrastructure to be possible. But if it doesn't ultimately create that effect, it will be as if it does nothing at all. And actually, I think, without going into it, there's strong arguments, I think, to be made. I know Nance was also talking on Substack, the kind of a difference between capitalism and capital, which I kind of like that distinction. You have capitalism as pricing mechanism, coordination, distinctions, and capital being a mode of consciousness that views the world according to fungibility and exchangeability and prices and all of that. My argument would be, is
that correct, Nance? A mode of consciousness, or like a general
taking it,
or like a general intellect? Yeah.
It being this kind of disembodied general intellect, but it has this form of consciousness, and it enforces this consciousness on us because it currently that's where the power is located.
Right. Okay, so yeah. I just wanted to double check that because so it enforces this consciousness on us. We have this consciousness as our default setting because it is this generalized, instrumentalized intellect operating. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the irony is that, Keynes in the general theory, I'm also thinking Robert Solow on the Solow residual. I'm thinking of Cohn on the stagnation. Basically, capitalism without demand becomes very bad at the function of utility and goods and all of those things. And it begins to stagnate into lower, shrinking middle class and all of those different things. The great irony that capitalism has not dealt with is that capitalism as a mechanism of resources trains people into the mode of consciousness that is capital, that then removes the demand or the motivation or the ability to think in terms of creativity and innovation, without which capitalism then falls into a great stagnation. Okay. That's the fundamental problem we're dealing with, I think. And so this is where, even if capitalism as a pricing mechanism in coordination can successfully deal with some of the grammars of society with resources and water and different things, since it does not necessarily in that architecture generate the mode of consciousness to experience the beautiful or the capital G good, it's as if it accomplishes nothing at all. And actually, it begins to regress, because if it doesn't continue to move toward the beautiful, then people are like, what's the point? Meaning crisis, nihilism. Then people can't pay for their bills and the entire system begins to go under. So the problem is this is what I want to say. There's a fundamental irony in capitalism where, when you listen to a Hayek, and I think Land was pointing this out, when you look at a Hayek or a von Mises and the Austrians, they're like, well, can you coordinate resources better? Do you have a better mechanism to respond to people? And you're like, well, I don't know. But then what Keynes, and for my opinion, and Deidre McCloskey disagrees with this, but I disagree with her, although I greatly respect her work, is on the idea that capitalism actually trains you into a mode of consciousness that then reverses the great enrichment. And if you don't get a social coordination mechanism, which I do believe the Internet Theory Underground Philosophy Portal is, to train different modes of consciousness, then capitalism ultimately becomes auto-cannibalistic. But that requires actually a more sophisticated moral theory, ultimately. We actually have to move to thinking the good in a more sophisticated way. I'll pause here. There's more to say, but like most moral theory has been thought experiments, trolley problems, kind of notions of reducing pain. All of those have a very important role because all of those are helping you deal with the problem of utility and third world nations and improving those things. But if that's all you get, then you don't have any guidance by which to discern in your own life better goods, better beauties, and different ways to condition yourself for greater experiences, which you are always already doing, whether you know it or not. And I think that goes to the point which you were saying with your students. You're already in the game of discerning what you think is good, true, and beautiful. It's just without any training, and this goes to institutions, without any institutions or spaces to train that, you almost by definition are going to absorb the zeitgeist and mode of consciousness of capitalism, which we've said is capital, which ironically then destroys demand in the system that makes capitalism fall into a great stagnation. That's the irony, is that capitalism breeds a mode of consciousness that removes to use a fancy word, the autocatalytic environment that generates the innovation and creativity and the ability to sort different, not merely technologies, but ways of thinking, because there's not merely innovation in terms of technology, but ways of thinking. And if you don't have a diversity of modes of thinking, not just information, but ways of thinking, forms versus in form, what is in a form, information is always in a form. That's why you have that language of form classically. If you can't think different forms, which Plato in Book 7 of the Republic, I always think is fascinating, associates with the orbits of planets. Like a form is not the perfect form of the planet. In fact, funny enough, he says the danger with the back then planets is that they're perfect. So you look at the planet, not the form of its orbit, and therefore you're distracted by perfection from the form, which then is regressive. The form is the organizing principle in orbit of the planet, in which things are informed and information is generated. If you have a society that does not have a pluralism and diversity of modes of consciousness, ergo forms, then it ultimately cannot have an autocatalytic environment of environment and difference, like a healthy ecosystem that can generate different ways of thinking. That then means capitalism forms into something that is auto-cannibalistic, because then it cannot provide its own demand to keep the system going. But that is going to be able to think beyond the good of utility to the good of human flourishing, which, of course, if you're in capitalism, you're trained against thinking. So there's a great paradox here that has to be. We have to think that which we're habituated out of thinking, which seems to require new networks, infrastructure such as this to make possible. I'll pause there.
Woo! I want to pause the recording and stream, and everyone just hang on. I'm going to go back over everything, and I'm actually going to transcribe it and seriously think about it before I say what I have to say next.
I'm going to slow down to 0.75.
Yeah.
And really, really, really dig in.
Yeah. I want to hone in on this though. Why is capital smart? Right. And from the Landian perspective, going back to that conversation, it is this sort of Misesian, the genius of the pricing system. And no, you can't have it function so well if people have nothing to lose or get everything for free. It actually requires people sacrificing. There has to actually be cost benefit analysis. There has to actually be zero sum ultimatums. There has to actually be risk and people putting their stake on this or that. And sure, you have a lot of people making dumb decisions or not being rational in this sort of economic sense. And you have a lot of people do risky endeavors, and you have a lot of artificial desires inculcated, and you have suicidal demands fostered. But with all of those things said and done, the general tendency is one of some kind of progression. And obviously from that standpoint, it is the progression of a self-correcting, disembodied, general form of intelligence. All right. And so I want to say that that's all fine. I want to bring in what Matthew Stanley brought up in the chat. But first, I want to just say that, yeah, on this like supply demand issue, like we got into the demand for cheeseburgers and the demand for, shitty music and the demand for, I mean, we didn't say it, but we're always thinking about Taylor Swift bobbleheads is socially necessary, is a kind of labor that produces bobbleheads socially necessary. Well, I mean, what would we have good old fashioned Americana without the little dancer on the van dash with the grass skirt? No, we would not. Like that at a certain level, we want to have little things like this. Like there is something necessary about gross expenditure, about waste, about doing things that don't make rational sense. And there is obviously like a beauty in that as well. But what we don't like is the waste of potential when the people whose potential is being wasted don't even know that they had that potential in the first place. That's one kind of waste. And then the other kind of waste is when you know you have that potential, but you didn't get to develop it. The one that probably resonates with everybody. Every time you hear an adult say that they wish that they had learned another language as a child, there you go. That's that resentment that comes from knowing you had a potential. It would have been really fucking easy for you to learn another language. The education system did not support it. And so you came out the other side of that without it. And then, of course, we could problematize that and say that people can spend 7 years in Spanish and it doesn't actually teach them the language. They actually have to do sort of foreign exchange programs or actually be around people who use the other language. Of course. That's a bigger problem, that people do not have that kind of thing. But what we're getting at is the creation of demands that make people feel like they are basically having their desires satisfied, when in reality, they have these metaphysical desires, these higher human capacity potential, virtually purposive kind of potential possibilities that are atrophying. Right. And people aren't able to explore, discover, and cultivate those talents or relationships. And so they don't know what they don't have. And so then we say, oh, well, they're the ones that are choosing what they want. And so capital is just responding to what they want. And it's like, I almost just want to say, yeah, Plato and Aristotle were right on this. People don't know what they want. It actually requires elders in your society who at a certain level regulate desire, not just by saying, don't do that, you shouldn't have this, but also just by kind of showing the way, showing like, hey, look at all the kind of fun things we can do when we work together. In sports are an obvious example of that. You can have a society that encourages sports, or you can have a society that says, no, we don't even care about that at all. And then the same thing for art, obviously, and you go down the line. And I just wanted to bring in Durkheim to say, like, we have this general state of anomie, which is a way he talks about it is desire unchained. And so when we're talking about the deregulation of desire in capitalism, we're not just talking about, oh, there's not enough prohibition saying don't do this, don't do that. We're also just talking about like, no, but the things that are constantly reminding us about who we are or what we want do not have our best interests at heart. The people behind it have no pretense that they actually have our best interests at heart. The beer, sex, and gambling or pharmaceutical industry commercials that we constantly see have nothing to do with the good, the true, the beautiful, the natural. That has nothing to do with any of these things, much less the intersection of these things. And so it feels like this sort of Deleuzian, Landian approach flattens everything I just said and is missing what we take to be the main point. And I know that Nance has something he wants to say before we pass it back over to you.
No, I just, when we're talking about this, like knowing, the ability to know, to discern, right? Because we are already, using our discernment, but we're not consciously using our discernment. Like we're already aware, but we're not aware of our awareness. So we need to find a way to like take up our own awareness and agency. But like, as you were just talking, Dave, I immediately jumped to the movie Suburbia by Penelope Spheris. We watched it at Theory Underground. I've seen it tons of times. It's an oldie but a goodie, but it's a depressing punk rock movie. And it captured something that I lived through personally that's been romanticized in a lot of the media, but like homeless street punk rock kids who are just living in a house, doing excess, drinking, fornicating, destroying, fighting, doing all this stuff because we think we're liberated, right? We're like, I'm going to live on my own terms. I am going to, I'm the Fruit Loops bird, follow my nose, right? But we don't have anyone there to shepherd us into that self-aware discernment. And so we think we're exercising agency, when in reality, we're just continuing the death spiral that we're already locked into in capitalism. So we do need, it may sound gross on the surface to say we need cultural elders or leaders to point us in this right direction. But, Peter Pan and the Lost Boys rejecting the notion of the good, you wind up being a bunch of homeless punk rock kids living in a house, and you all die of overdoses, or you go to prison. And yeah, it's important. What is the good? And should we take the natural and the normal for granted? And how do we get there? This is very important. And I guess if anyone's out there that had a reaction to the idea of the notion of the good, stick with it, tarry with it, because it's necessary.
I wanna where I quilted my piece on Substack called "What's Good," was with a rather crass example of pooping on the floor and how we don't tend to do that. In fact, we're all very good at not doing it. In fact, if you are in our audience and you're not good at not doing that, you're not invited to TUCon. So we only try to hang out with people who are really good at not just shitting randomly on the floor anywhere they like or feel the impulse to go. No, in fact, instead they've learned to put it over there, right? There's socially agreed upon places that we put it. And I use this example because I feel like it's one that's really good at getting at the fact that something can be socially constructed and normalized and therefore made to feel natural and also made to feel good, which is, that goes in the toilet, right? But that is good. It is actually good. Now, we have to sit here and say, what kind of good are we talking about? Well, we can get into that. But it is also natural, though socially constructed. What does that mean? Well, what I mean is that the human has to discover the best way to dispense with our own waste. We have to figure out what to do with it. And then we have to train ourselves how to do that. We have to train our little kids and say, this is where that goes. And this is how you wipe your own ass. And if we don't do that, well, then we have to deal with certain kinds of consequences, disease, but also just smelly people, for instance. And and we say, well, that's disgusting. Well, disgusting in this sense is the opposite of what we're taking to be good. So like this sense of disgust is actually based in something that says, yeah, not natural, not good. But it is obviously also in a sort of sense natural to have to go to the bathroom. And there's nothing natural about putting it in a toilet, much less in water. You know, you've got fresh water. What a waste. Well, there's nothing natural about that. So there is like this socially constructed element of it. But my point about the social construction is to say all mammals know you don't shit in the bed. All mammals instinctually know you don't just put it like right in the nest. So all mammals have a sense it goes somewhere else. All mammals have to figure that out. And if the young are shitting the bed, let's just say it's a cat. Well, mama cat's going to lick it up because she knows it can't just be in the bed. So that's kind of disgusting, right? Yeah, well, it's not as gross as just letting it stay in the bed. And then, of course, the moment those kittens are able to walk and see, and they discover some loose sand or litter, they instantly know, oh, okay, it's going to go over here, because cats are very clean and they want to stay clean. And we can say that that's just nature. It's instinct. It's obviously something, a capacity that we have to some degree selected for, because we want our furry companions to know better, right? But dogs don't. I mean, they'll just go right on the lawn, right? Yes, they will, but they won't go in their bed. As we're assuming non-abused creatures and non-senile, like about to die old. You know, we're assuming healthy dogs. So there is this sense where I'm conflating the good, the natural, and the healthy, and that could be problematic. Here we have a dog. Hey, buddy, I think he knows not to shit in his bed, doesn't he? Hey, Charlie.
Yeah, it was a hard one lesson, but yes.
Oh, okay. Well, so in some cases, we actually do have to train it into a domesticated creature.
Well, look, French bulldogs are genetic retards.
Okay. So. Fair enough. Yeah. Womp, womp, womp. Okay. So with everything I just said, my basic point is about instinct. We don't have it. At least not when it comes to where to shit. But we discover and then train ourselves in where to shit. And that happens to be like we're having to teach ourselves something that all other animals just knew naturally. Well, what could be some other things like that? Maybe, I don't know, nurturing your young, right? There are obviously mammals that don't really have to nurture their young, and then they kind of run off and go do their own thing. Like father bears don't stick around mama bears after mama bears have had babies. Well, could we be that way? Could we be that way where men can kind of just run off after? I mean, Rousseau thought we are as noble savages in the state of nature. He thought we just run. The male impregnates the attractive woman. I don't know if she was down or not. It happened. Baby's on the way. Dad's like, peace out, bitches. It never has to come back. Okay, well, the point is that we don't have a natural predisposition that we know of. We can tap certain capacities. The male can tap the capacity of realizing, I love being a free spirit and just chasing pussy all over the planet. Yeah, but that male could also tap the capacity of realizing that it is rewarding to be there for your loved ones. Okay. But also that can be fostered. If it's discovered, it can be fostered. It can be taught. And it has to be if what we care about is the true, the beautiful, the natural, the good, right? So this is a sticky mess of problems because these things can be instrumentalized and then used against us in all kinds of ways. Just because there's a kernel of truth in something doesn't mean that the traditional narrative about it has a monopoly on that kernel, right? But of course, we throw the baby out with the bathwater if we go with the standard constructivist approach. That's a lot. I know I brought up so fucking much, but I just really wanted to lay out this poop example to then segue into, okay, but also that's assuming that what's good is natural, is healthy, which is to say it's imminent, it grows on trees, as opposed to different possibility that would say it's transcendent. It comes down from heaven. It comes down from pure mathematics. Maybe there's a kind of math we haven't discovered yet. It comes down from some kind of ideal abstraction that is nonetheless real. And that's also possible. And for anybody who's doing a genuinely critical project, we have to take that seriously, no matter how much it might get distorted or appropriated to other people's pernicious plans. And so, yeah, what do you want to do with all that?
Oh, it's beautiful. All right, so a few things. So first, to say something large.
Now for a little message from our sponsor.
Whether you are a regular who's been to Theory Underground for a lot of past content or are here for the first time ever, I want to say welcome. But more importantly, the real point of this little ad break is to remind you that if you're here, it's because somebody else made it visible to you. Somebody else who came before you paid it forward. They paid it forward by clicking the like button. That's right. You would not know about this content if someone else didn't click the little I like this button. The I like this button is how the algorithm knows to show it to other people. And so, based on your viewing habits, it might recommend it to somebody else. So, you can thank somebody for paying it forward, and then you can keep it going forward yourself by smashing that little like button. Thank you.
If you have a pricing coordination and testing mechanism, but you do not at the same time have a social coordinating and testing mechanism like this, then what ends up happening is the pricing mechanism trains people into a mode of consciousness that destroys the demand that the pricing mechanism needs. And as a result, it then has to stimulate demand by playing on base desires to keep the system going until it eats itself. So what you have is capitalism as a pricing testing mechanism did not take into account and this is where Marx is valuable, did not take into account the simultaneous sociological training that was occurring that would train people into a mode of consciousness that would be antithetical to that pricing mechanism, because the technology has not existed until now with the YouTube internet training to create a social coordination mechanism by which we can test different modes of consciousness, ideas of the good, to come up with the best notion of a meta situation that can best realize that based on the qualities of the good that we may associate it with, say, flow, autocatalytic information generation, like you're having ideas in a conversation like this you never had before, you feel inspired. All of those would be qualities of the good that is not reducible to an essence of the good that then can be totalitarian as a norm in the ways that Foucault put forth. So that would be a point. A few more things. I think on the idea of do we think that nests are unnatural, bird nests? We do not see nests in nature. A bird has to make it. It is constructed, but we tend to associate that with nature, right? A lot of what we call unnatural or human society is based on actually a dualism where we separate human beings from nature versus a continuation of nature in human beings. And also we think ideas are not part of nature. Benita Roy is very good on that. Leah Anderson. We are parts of nature. The reason we think this is because there's an environmental bias that thinks the world would have a better environment if humans vanished. Therefore, we are destroying the environment. Therefore, we are not part of nature. But this is where people like Einstein, Charles Einstein in Sacred Economics, there's also Tyson, the Australian Aborigine that Tim will talk with, who talks about actually there are places of nature when humans leave, they die. They're worse off. Like humans, think of it this way. If humpback whales and coyotes have an incredibly important role to keep the environment sustained and alive by, say, moving CO2 or different things, why wouldn't human beings also have a potential role in nature that is just as necessary as the humpback whale or the coyote or the squirrel, et cetera, and so forth? It's just based on a kind of bias that assumes that humans are bad for nature. Now, obviously, you can say the majority of times humans are bad for nature, but it would actually be an unjustified leap to say, therefore, humans are not part of nature. The reason why this is important is because then when you start saying pooping on the floor, is bad, well, a social construction that we generated so that we can thrive in nature as part of nature is not pooping on the ground, right? And so it's the mistake that people like Harari, who did Homo Deus and Nexus, he makes, where he says money is a construct, it's an illusion. it's not real, right?
Right.
Well,
right,
all
right.
of that presupposes a human nature divide that has not existed. Money arose from humans who are part of nature. So money actually is easily part of nature, but of a different ontology and dimensionality from, say, the nest. But if you start saying nature ends here and humans begin there, you get all sorts of problems that I think confuses the conversation. Now, if you would like to argue that money is an ineffective coordination system, or it has unintentional consequences of training us into bad behavior, that's fine. But if you say it's an illusion, it really doesn't tell us much, because all the psychoanalysis, like Freud, the future of the illusion, their whole point, sociology is the realization that you require constructs to organize society, or global pluralism is going to kill us all. And also the anxiety of the loss of givens and freedom results in a breakdown of the human subject. So the fact that things are constructed, and then you say, well, it's constructed, therefore it's not natural. Well, then I think you also have to say bird nests are not natural. And you also have to say caves that, all these things that animals create are not natural, because these are not things that are naturally arising without the existing of a living organism. And furthermore, you have to say the human mind is not a continuation of nature. So on, Dave, please.
But could the bird not build the nest?
Yeah, it absolutely could. But so this is where, for me, I would bring in Hegel. There is, for some reason, evolutionarily natural selection, where the majority of birds who have survived have been the ones who have made nests, right? But this is why. So here's a big point that I would like. The problem is, for most of human history, we have tried to talk about the good without a social testing mechanism by which we can test different ideas of the good beyond the utility, so that we can actually have a way to coordinate goods based on practices. Okay, we have not had a mean testing system, right? So when you look at the nests and stuff like that, there were birds who didn't make nests. And actually, there are some birds that, like ducks, I guess, or different birds that don't need nests because they have a different environment, right? So relative to what the bird is, it makes a guess on what would be best for it to survive, that then through time, we get a determination of what is best. And then birds naturally and instinctually operate, right? So likewise, human beings, through time, there are and have been civilizations where people pooped on the floor and not in toilets. That was most of human civilization before sanitation and piping and different things. And it turned out to make people sick and not work out so well. The people who continued to do that died or didn't do so well, and the people that did do it continued to survive, right? Now, so then you have a sorting mechanism of on-deal. So you construct a different way of operation, not on a certain notion of the good, but a notion of what would be better based on confidence and experience. And this is why, for me, in Hegel, when he talks about the state or the Geist, a way to think about that is the philosophy of right. We gave a presentation on this. Is he's looking at Rousseau and Hobbes and saying, you're placing the state of nature in the past. I want now. The state of now is the state of nature. And if now we gave rise to a society with politics, institutions, and not pooping on the floor, then there's reason to assume that, because through history, this is what has been maintained. And so now, we should assume that, right? Now, here's the key move, though. Here's the problem. All right, that's great. But all that has done is tested the utility good, the good of utility, right?
Yes.
Okay. So now the question is, but what about the mode of consciousness of the beautiful, or what Plato and Aristotle are talking? We have not had the technology by which to test different ideas and modes of consciousness that we could put in coordination. The best way we have done it is through colleges, bringing a lot of different people together to compete with one another, which then was captured by the pricing mechanism in the mode of consciousness of capital, right? So the very mechanism of bringing people together for social creating of environments by which you could test different modes of consciousness and ideas of the good, then ended up being mono thinking under a single mode of consciousness of getting a job in utility, thus colleges or town squares, and then you can get into zoning laws, modern architecture. I've been reading a lot on the different zoning laws. There's a wonderful book called The Rise and Fall of American Cities by Jonah Jones, I believe. And that book is basically how post-war zoning laws destroyed the vibrancy of human architecture for people to come up with ideas, because the zoning, let's put it this way, certification for intellectual work has destroyed the autocatalytic functions and emergent possibility of modes of consciousness in the same way that zoning laws have been in architecture to destroy thriving American cities. Okay. And so they have similar problems, like when Ivan Illich is talking about certification. So what you've done is you've destroyed the potential for cities and localities and colleges to have a competition of modes of consciousness and ideas of the good. So now it is moving online, where then your idea of how to live the good life can be brought and here's the key, not just told, but shown to other people, right? This is a way to live, because you were talking about the bobblehead, and do cut me off, because whatever time we need to go, please just, shoot something in the air. So modes of consciousness, you were talking about the bobblehead, right? If you want a different mode of consciousness, you have to, one, see a different mode of consciousness, have the idea of a different mode of consciousness, and change your thinking. A lot of the people that want the bobblehead, as an example, they don't know any better. They've never seen different models. They haven't had the elders. They haven't had the family. They haven't had the community. Why would they ever think that reading Hegel could change their life? Why would they think that? Page 1, you're like, this sucks. Why would you think, if you keep drinking the carrot juice, that it would have an impact on you? You have to have models of it. Now, as a quick note, on the presentation at Philosophy Portal, I was talking about Juvenal, and he talks about the low, the middle, and the high. The high is like the capital nation state. The middle would be churches, school, community, marketplaces. The low is the individual. Juvenal says that the middle created injustices. It oppressed people, racism, closed-minded, fundamentalism, and so on. So the high teamed up with the low against the middle to liberate them from that oppression. All well and good. I think his argument on power is very good. But here's the problem. Without the middle, you don't have a training zone for different modes of consciousness. But the middle is what created racism, segregation, and all those problems, right? We need a new middle that trains different modes of consciousness, that allows a competition of a social mechanism. That's what this is. This internet, as used in this way, allows you to have a competition modeling different modes of consciousness that does not fall back onto the previous forms of the middle that led to segregation, racism, and all of those different things, and closed-mindedness, that allow people to see different ways of operating, as opposed to just getting lucky and going to college. Because that's the other thing. In having pluralism encounter until this technology was incredibly ineffective. It was geography bound. It tended to be age bound. Who can go live and study books for, you're a 20-year-old, right? Now you can be a family, you can have kids, you could be 60. It's also not age bound. You have 20, you have all generations now mixing. That is the autocatalytic environment where different modes of consciousness are possible. What I mean by autocatalytic is it can be its own catalyst, okay? Like it's an automatic catalyst for emergent ways of thinking. And what a lot of the architects talk about is that a thriving society requires an autocatalytic environment if it's not going to be stuck under the fungibility of capital, loss of demand, loss of creativity. So they talk about architecture, making sure you have the banks next to the shop, next to the school, like very together, lower class, middle class, high, all mingling. People, when they go to the baseball game, there are no VIP, pay more money, you're up in no. The rich people are in the stands with the low in the middle. And all the city planners, like the good ones, in my opinion, warn, if you do not have that mixture, you're going to have a death of what they'll call human architecture, and you have a stagnation in the society. That is what has happened with the mind. The mind itself has lost environments of autocatalytic possibilities. So then what ends up happening is you can't have a dialectic between a pricing mechanism and a social coordination mechanism. As a result, you get the mindset of capital that trains you. The assumption of the Austrians that was wrong is that the pricing mechanism does not simultaneously train you into what you want the pricing mechanism to serve you. That was the mistake, because it was the way I put it is they conflated the true and best, the rational and best, okay? The market is always rational is their argument. That's absolutely true, but is it always right? No. And what it is rational for is relative to a non-rational pre-dimension that human beings choose relative to their mode of consciousness. Within that mode of consciousness, it's a remarkable mechanism of coordination. That's the problem. It gives you what you want, and if you want crap, it gives it to you, right? And if you don't have a way to give you what you need to move into drive, then you're in massive problem. But then this is the problem. But then you say,
can you repeat that? What you just said?
Because it does not give you if you have the pricing mechanism and you don't desire drive, it will not give you what you need to have drive or intrinsic motion or different modes of consciousness because you're not giving it the signals to do that.
Thank you. Okay.
That's the problem. If you desire your destruction, the market gives it to you.
Okay.
Because and you say, and basically the Austrian says, well, that would never happen because self-destruction is not rational. Therefore, since the rational is best and the market is rational, it would never give you that outcome. That's not the case.
Right.
You can do what is rational and it be false. If I think it's going to rain today, it's rational to bring an umbrella. And let's say it doesn't rain. Does that mean I was irrational? No, I was rational to what I believed was true and it turned out to be false, right? That's the conflation of rational and best is the underlying premise of Austrian economics that is not true. But it's also a problem if you conflate, like what you can then say is you say, all right, well, capitalism trains people into these problematic characteristics, so let's get rid of capitalism. All right, removing the pricing coordination mechanism, if you don't have a social coordination mechanism, will actually just lead you to everyone killing one another because you unveil the anxiety where people don't have the mode of consciousness to handle something like anarchy. As this is why so many communities collapse, is because in order to handle non-mediated social relationships, you have to be really good at handling pluralism and difference. And if we look at Tocqueville, democracy collapsed because people couldn't handle it. I think the Chinese Cultural Revolution is an example of a true communist project where then people ate themselves because it's really hard to deal with freedom. I think you can look at Louis Dumont on the formation of the caste system. All of these things are examples of if you want to have modes of consciousness that are able to operate unmediated by a compressing mechanism like capital, because it makes everything understandable in terms of capital. That's why people like it. Because I know, oh, you work at Amazon. I work at a wedding day. We know each other. Great. It gives you a feeling of intelligibility, which if you can't handle the fullness of a human life, then that's the best you can do. Well, to handle the fullness of a better life, you've got to be trained by a new metal, elders, institutions, and family to be actually open to the other. It's like Levinas. Right. You've been talking about Levinas. If you want to have the infinite versus the totality per se, there's a whole lot of work. This is psychoanalysis. This is Lacan. Like, you can't simply free people from mechanisms of compression and expect them not to kill themselves, right? But here's the problem. So capitalism goes, yep, so don't complain. Get over it because you'll just eat yourself. But then it's like, but you're destroying the middle classes. Wages are in an inverse relationship with profit, and we have all these issues. And capitalism's like, well, what else are you going to do? The key is to create a social coordination testing mechanism by which people can see different modes of consciousness in the good. And then that offers a way that dialectically works with the pricing mechanism where you are able to avoid being reduced to the logic of capital and that mode of consciousness, and actually are then able to have the utility functions of the pricing mechanism without the mode of consciousness that leads to reductionism. So then the following question becomes this. All right, well, what is the beautiful by which I would think would be an indication of the way that people should live? Because there's a testing now, right? Okay, all right. So everyone has different ideas of the good beyond utility, the good life, right? Philosophy is all about the good life, right? All right. People have different ideas of what that is. Right?
Right.
Okay. The question would be, what are the qualities? Please.
And a lot of those ideas are bullshit. This is like a constant problem that comes up with students. You're like, okay, but people won't agree. And it's like, yeah. And in fact, a lot, like the overwhelming majority of us, we should assume are wrong about probably most things. And we're part of that. So yes. Okay. So keep going. Yeah. I just wanted to put in our differences in ideas about the good also are differences in the fact that there's a democracy of opinions and those opinions are mostly bullshit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but the issue is that without an expansive mode of consciousness, you don't even have the capacity to know that it's BS. You don't have the capacity to see that. So you're locked in this bubble of thinking, what is the good life? Because you don't have an ability to see beyond it, because you would need models, you would need coordination, you'd need ways of testing it that were not overly attacking, because if people are overly aggressive, then you get defensive and it all blows up, right? You need a way of indirectly showing, then talking through, not debating the contradiction that you might be like, well, the Nick Land conversation is a great example of a model of what it looks like to show a good conversation, the kind of conversation you'd expect to see in the good life without moralizing about it, right? Because if you want to show people the good life, you can't tell them the good life because that's oppressive, neurotic, and authority-based. You show them with a shine that attracts them into doing it themselves, and then they own it as their own in their own particular customization. That's the key to attraction, is it brings people to a similarity, but they simultaneously customize it as they're brought into that similarity. Thus, it does not become totalizing or flattening because there's an individuation. Like a way that Dante or Creech or different put it is that the more you approach the beautiful, it is not that you become some neutered, non-human, you become more human. Blue becomes more like beautiful. People become more like people. You become more like yourself as you approach the good. And yet in that particularity, since everyone who is orbiting that with you comes closer to their own particularity, there is a harmony in that creates a oneness that is not reducible to a sameness, like the harmony of a Beethoven's Ninth. Beethoven's Ninth is possible precisely because the instruments are not the same, because they are different, because they do different things. But when they come together, they can generate something that is not reducible to the sum of their parts, right? And this is where, when we talk about the transcendent, it's very important. Like the transcendent in a manner that is not a spurious infinity, but a true infinity in Hegel would be something like Beethoven's Ninth. Beethoven's Ninth is transcendent from the violin. It is transcendent from the piano. And yet it is not possible without them, right? And it's not also possible without the relation between all of the instruments. And it's also not possible without each individual musician doing the practice and work to be able to play at that quality, right? You bring all of those variables together in a particular time, in a particular place, with a particular commitment, something can arise that is not reducible to the parts, that has to be experienced to get, okay? Like if I told you about Beethoven's Ninth, or if I showed you the seat music, this is Beethoven's Ninth, would you really get Beethoven's Ninth? No, you have to hear it, which means you require people to have certain commitments to make it possible. Classically speaking, and I think this gets to what Studebaker was saying about the good, the capital G good being transcendent of presupposition, something you find. It's the belief that actually the good is something like Beethoven's Ninth, that requires a certain bringing together of variables and experiences that is possible in this life, that suggests something that no individual can just automatically have, and yet is also not possible without them, but it requires a commitment, a willing to relate with other people, and to give your life over to something that seems silly. It seems kind of silly to spend a whole lot of time getting really good at a violin, right? There's no guarantee of money. Even if you get in an orchestra, are you going to be able to pay for everything on that? Probably not, unless you are the highest level, right? So there's a kind of absurdity to it. And yet, because of that absurdity, because of the willingness to practice and to come to this place, something can come forth that when people hear it in the audience, if it is a truly great experience of Beethoven's Ninth, does anyone in the audience say, oh, this is only my subjective idea of the good? Does anyone say this is just my preference? Truly great art screams at you, this is good whether you like it or not. And it comes forth. Now, you have to do the work to condition yourself to be able to understand Beethoven's Ninth or the music or James Joyce. You can't just automatically necessarily get it. But the key is that the good in this sense is not relative, but conditional. A lot of people talk about objective, relative. I think the correct category is conditional. There are certain conditions that have to be met for the highest good to come forth that is not reducible to utility, but it is also not merely relevant, relative, or subjective, because it comes into existence when people meet certain conditions because of certain commitments that they realize is worth doing, okay? This notion of the good, which is transcendent but not in a spurious way, it's an irreducibility. This is precisely the kind of experience people need to have to know that there are different modes of consciousness from capital that will change their behavior, ideas of the rational, the idea of how to allocate their time, that will change their behaviors in the system, that until this technology has not been readily available for people to see or to participate in because the restrictions of capital, money, and time and geography were too high, right? And so what has happened is, in a sense, we got the pricing mechanism too early. We got the mechanism of allocating resources too early before we had the social mechanism that could train us to use that mechanism without being trained into a mode of consciousness that would lead to a capital nation state that's auto-cannibalistic, right? But now we have that. And now we just have to have the faithful presence to organize ourselves according to it. And there are many, and it ultimately requires that commitment to doing the work of that shine and showing. But in doing that, you model and show people a different mode of consciousness that is so needed if they're going to avoid being trained by capitalism into a capital that then ironically eats the whole thing. auto-cannibalistic thing, but please.
Yeah.
Cool, man. That's good stuff. You were like aware of the time 16 minutes ago, and like you're like, cut me off if you need to. And the reason I did not is because I actually planned more time for our segment than I normally have in the past, because I always regret cutting it off at the hour mark with you. So we're not rushing right now. I mean, to all the people who are the poor souls that are listening to you at 1.5 speed or whatever to try to catch up, just calm down. Just listen to it at regular speed, and then speed the rest of the stream. It's okay. You can slow it down just for this one. We've given ourselves the time here so that Nance actually has a chance to also engage with this. I have a few essays in me that I want to write just to think through all of this, because I feel like our intersections, like where we're all working at here, it's very fertile. But with that, yeah, like Nance, how about you do something? You take it away. I'm going to be listening in, and I'm going to make myself a quick little snack from downstairs while I listen.
Snack time. Yeah, man. Every day I become more and more aware of the, is kismet the word I'm thinking of? I don't know, the synergy, the synchronicity, just between like all the threads that you and everyone else we're kind of bringing together. We're bringing to this new loom that we've maybe discovered, and we're trying to weave a new tapestry. But it does become just more and more evident that there are so many of these intersections between the lines of thought. The fact, like, I just like, yeah, everything you said is just spot on. And it also happens to be what I'm thinking right now, what I'm working on right now when it comes to why does the world seem to work in this way that has a superficial efficiency. And for some people, it's even like a superficial correctness. Like, it is proper. Things happen how they should happen. Just like Land says, like, yeah, capital is, the most, I don't want to offend anybody by trying to impersonate Nick Land and doing poorly. So I won't do that. I almost did. But yeah, capital is this system of, market efficiencies, and it's probably better than what we could have done otherwise, because we didn't have the social technology, or I would even say the, spiritual technology. And I use the word spiritual in a materialist sense, but I don't like, I think that's another kind of synergy that we can, that's a two-way road that we're both driving on, when we can talk about the spiritual in this way. But now I think we are discovering / developing these technologies, to raise our consciousness, raise our awareness, and like raise our ability to execute on our agency. I think for me, I'm like, it just comes back to this, like, it is this intelligence. Well, what is intelligence? Do we just want this instrumental, very mathematic world, or do we want a soft and squishy world where we can have beauty, and we can have the sublime, and we can have interpersonal relationships? Like, the person always seems to get erased. So I think for me, it's kind of weird. I seem to be returning to some type of humanism, because for years I was like, yeah, humanism is a tricky thing, and the word human is a tricky word, and I think it's been used to exclude more often than it's been used to include. But I think we are maybe approaching a moment where the notion of the human is one that we can actually politically actualize and like use it to our benefit, use it to kind of claim the surface of the earth, or reclaim the surface of the earth from capital itself. And I am stunned at all the kind of like all the stuff you're saying. There thoughts that I've been having. It's like, dude, I just thought that the other day, or I just wrote that down the other day. And it's like, but also having this space where we can come and we can bring different approaches, different backgrounds, different perspectives, different lenses, you say things that I can't see. So just the fact of us having a conversation kind of allows new things to emerge into the space that otherwise, it would be a sterile space if it were just me thinking in isolation. So
yeah,
I love it, man. I'm stoked.
Oh, no, I think that's beautifully said. And again, if we think of the autocatalytic, which I know is a $5 word, but it can be useful, where just simply the gathering of people entails in of itself a catalyst of possible thoughts that that no one person could have on their own as an individual, and yet everyone feels shine inspiration from them. That is true pluralism in a sense. That is pluralism when it's architectural, not merely visual. It is a certain bringing together of people that have a deep difference. That I do think another way to put it, that I think I mentioned at the conference, there's a way in which when Deleuze is talking about the rise, I know you had Terence on, where he's bringing together Deleuze and Zizek, which I think is very, very fruitful, and he did that at the live conference at Philosophy Portal. There's an idea where the rhizomatic thinking of Deleuze, again, was in a sense too early because there was not the social coordinating mechanism like this by which the rhizomatic could occur without ending up ultimately in an anarchism or a form of alienation, right? But what he's getting at as avoiding capture in the light of flight is exactly right, but it did not necessarily have the technology by which to realize that potential. There's some other things too. There is no system like if Rebecca Goldstein has a lovely book explaining Kurt Gödel. That I like. There's also that other one, but there's that idea on Gödel that basically what he shows is not that there's no such thing as truth, but there's no such thing as a formal system. And what a formal system is a system that is able to justify its own premises and axioms, right? Like its own ideas. So it's all self-contained, right? And what Gödel shows is, no, ultimately, because of numbers, there's going to be a point where there's an incompleteness. I call that the Gödel point, right? Well, so it goes with all systems. There is no such thing as a formal system, whether capitalism, socialism, it doesn't matter. Democracy, every single system has a certain point where there's a incompleteness, where coherence and correspondence break, right? That's where the human is. The fundamental human creative element, which is both the source of creativity and negentropy for it, but also the possibility of the failure that destroys the whole thing, right? So the question is the following. The Austrian says, exactly. That's why we need to emphasize the individual, the individual and the self, because the human is ultimately what makes or break the entire thing. The issue is that full humanness in a very odd way cannot come out without others, not because the individual is irrelevant compared to the community, but because it's a feedback loop between the wholes and the parts are two sides of the same coin. That's Hegel's whole idea with the contradiction, right? Like if you talk about a tree, you automatically have to talk about limbs and it's always passing into otherness, right? Individuals are always passing into otherness. I think Deleuze uses the term individual or different things, right? Hegel would agree. And the funny thing is that therefore for the human to be in that Gödel point, to avoid the self-effacement of the auto-cannibalism, you need a certain coordination of individuals together to realize the fullness of the human being that can maintain the negentropy of the system. Here's the problem. Relations are hard. We are very bad at relationships, and especially if we don't have a middle to teach us, right? So in order for the human to be at the Gödel point, to make the whole thing work, we have to do it together, and relations are freaking hard. And we're really bad at talking. Like Chekhov is like, Harold Bloom said this about Chekhov. He's like, if you pay attention to Chekhov, basically the lesson is that people who love one another are constantly misunderstanding one another. Oh, and the more that people care about one another, they tend to snuff out one another. And they tend to take things personally and destroy it all, right? Oh, crap. That means we almost want to believe it is the rugged individual who stands in that point, because that's easier than the complexity of relationships that seem to have no given map of how to operate in every possible circumstance. You have to live discern them every single frickin' time. And that's where the Aristotelian virtue ethics come in, because what that is about is if when you read that with the negative, can never say it, ethics, is about habits and live discernment of live situations that cannot be universalized beyond the immediate. That all requires training. And there is no middle to provide that training. Oh, and the training from the past tended to be given to a very similar ethnicity, Christians, not the between difference. So we need training by which to deal with relations between incredibly different people. Well, that's a whole new freaking ball game, man. And yet, if you do not do that, you cannot have a way to compete with the pricing mechanism. Studebaker will emphasize the movement of global capital. If you don't have a movement of social consciousness that is able to keep up with the movement of capital, and thus the habituation of that capital, then you're in trouble. So you have there is no formal system. There's always a girdle point. The human stands in the girdle point, and to the degree that humans can actually rise to the occasion of that girdle point is to the degree they can handle relationships with other people that are effing hard, because community is hard. There are all these little differences. So that's the rub. And if you want to get out under the problems of capitalism, that's the challenge. And there are just additional, there seems to be a weird inverse relationship between profit and wages. There seems to be a conflation of the two. There are different problems, you could say girdle points in capitalism, that ultimately make the machine not work on its own except for itself. Because here's the problem. When we say that capitalism doesn't work, we're always saying it from the human standpoint, right? To itself, it works great, and it's going to work really great when it leaves human beings behind. That's why Nick Land is saying, AI is the logical outcome. That's exactly right. When we talk about this problem of spreading human consciousness, that's a human problem. That's not a system problem, right? In a way, the scaling problem benefits the system, right? And so, but that means we have to provide mechanisms of this coordination. And it requires a kind of constant testing. I guess the last thing I'll say, this has been delightful, is there's always a tension between accuracy and use, underfitting and overfitting different models, right? And that's where most of moral theory has been stuck in trying to create an accurate map, so that because you don't know the situations ahead of time, so that you can, but the problem is it becomes useless because it assumes variables, right? Or it's based on a trolley problem that's a hypothetical. If you want to have a constant negotiation between accuracy and use, you need a regular system of testing that mechanism and different ideas of modes of consciousness that best find that negotiation between overfitting and underfitting models, ergo byfitting, I think is the term, that requires a social coordinating mechanism and tests by which to do that. So that's another factor. The entire pricing mechanism is always looking for guesses at value and the use of that value that are accurate. If you want a isomorphic parallel to that, you need a social mechanism to do the same thing. And so that's also part of it. But I think it's a great time to be alive, because I think these are fun challenges that we all can explore. And I think communities like this one are taking it on, and Philosophy Portal and Voicecraft and others. And the more that we take it on and show and model these possibilities, the more they can inspire people to do the same. And that is happening. We just have to maintain the faithful presence of that work.
Tight, yeah.
Thanks so much, man. It was great to have you on.
You're muted, David.
You're muted. El Muto.
Thanks so much, man. It was so great to have you on, and looking forward to bringing you back soon.
I love you. Bye, guys.
Yeah,
Thank
man.
you.
Hey,
Thank you, Daniel. Love you, man.
Don't go anywhere. Hang out for a sec. All right. Be right back, everybody.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
The rest of this PSA used to have a long-winded explanation about who Mikey is, about his seminar series, as well as the seminar series that I do at Theory Underground, but I'm going to short-circuit the whole thing by just saying this. You can support the free and public work at TU by becoming a patron over at Patreon, or if you want to attend the live recordings of the seminars that I do, that Mikey does, or that Benjamin Studebaker does, as well as unlock special access to past courses, get involved in the discussions, have us read your writing, etc., well, then you want to become a subscriber at the Theory Underground website. That's how you become a real member at TU. All right? And so I'm going to allow this video to close out with Benjamin Studebaker sharing why he believes in Theory Underground and is supporting this effort.
Yeah. So the thing that I notice is that a lot of people criticize the university. They criticize the left. They don't build an alternative institution. They will go, the university sucks, but you know what's great? Substack and Patreon and YouTube. And they'll lean into that. But that is a negation, right? You guys don't do that. You guys are interested in sublating the university within the newly emergent media. Or you could frame it the other way, sublating the newly emergent media within the university, right? And so this, of course, will ultimately lead, if you take it where it goes, to a question of institutions and having actual economic, social role possibilities for theorists. This is the critical crisis, which is that there are still some very bright, very well-educated people, but they are not able to replace themselves. And because most of them have university positions, their level of interest in replacing themselves is to some degree compromised.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry that much about themselves. They don't have that much stake in it because they're already set up. However, because you are in the underground, you have some potential of being able to actually create an institution or structure which makes it possible for people to do theory in the future. This is something that, as far as I can tell, only you are doing. The thing about freeing Mikey from wage labor, this idea not only that your channel would free you from the Amazon job, but that this could grow in such a way that it could provide spaces for multiple people, and then those multiple people could interact in the way that they would in a monastery or in a university department. This is the revolutionary idea in terms of raising consciousness and making it possible for us to think in such a way that we could return even to the horizons of the tens and talking about things like Medicare for all in a not stupid, not bullshit way, in a serious way. To get to that point, we need to raise our level of ability to think. We need new intellectuals in our generation that are real intellectuals and not people who are running around scared of what the DSA or their university department thinks of them. You have the potential to actually make a real material intervention into not just knowledge production, but in Bildung, into the making of people. Yeah. This is something that we can do. There's a window right now where I am not in the university, and so I have a real reason to think very seriously about, can we do something else? Because I'm annoyed, myself with the whole process of trying to be in that. And I would like there to be something else, something better. I have all my critiques of it that come in part from being at Cambridge, in part from studying ancient thinkers. We could do something better than it. Not just something that is an imitation or steals some things from it and does the best you can with it, but something that actually is better and that produces the kind of theory that in modernity, how do you make a Hegel? How do you make a Marx? We have to reinvent this. It's no longer possible to do that. We've got to, I think, actually institutionalize in a material way, and this is the sense in which I will uphold the kernel of materialism, actually giving a shit about the structure and what kind of structure is necessary to give rise to a form of life in which this kind of really, really good work can be produced.